to our first of 3 sessions dealing with the challenges of urban wildlife. This year, District 23 chose to support Toronto Wildlife Centre as our community initiative. Toronto Wildlife Centre was established in 1993 to promote the peaceful coexistence of people and wildlife by providing education and expert advice about wildlife situations and providing medical care to sick, injured, orphaned wild animals with the ultimate goal of releasing them healthy back into the wildlife. It is the only wildlife rehabilitation center in the city, and it deals with over 270 different species of wildlife, from tiny hummingbirds to wolves and everything in between. The only wild animals living in Southern Ontario that they are not able to admit due to a lack of appropriate caging are adult deers and bears. Today, our speaker will be Victoria Badham. Her position at Toronto Wildlife Centre is the Education and Outreach Manager. Victoria joined Toronto Wildlife Centre hotline team in 2011 after completing her undergraduate degree in environmental policy and urban studies at the University of Toronto. Responding to thousands of hot calls from wildlife emergencies to requests for general information increased her awareness of the vast issues affecting urban wildlife, as well as commonly held misconceptions about various wildlife creatures and the urgent need for broader public education. She now holds a Master's of Education from the University of Toronto and manages the Toronto Wildlife Centre hotline, education, and outreach programs. She aims to inspire children and youth alike to respect and connect with nature and the amazing wild species with whom we share our neighborhood. For this presentation, all participants will be muted. Please use the chat to post questions or comments. We will address all questions at the end of the sessions. If there is a pertinent question to this issue that Victoria is talking to, we will bring that in. Please note, this session will be recorded and placed on our District 23 website if you wish to revisit it. So, without any delay, here is Victoria.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thanks to all of you for choosing Toronto Wildlife Centre as your organization to support this year. Like Cheryl said, support is so critically important for helping these animals get back to the wild that come in sick, injured, or orphaned. So today we are going to focus on birds. I'm really excited about this. There's lots of issues around birds. And of course, birds are the bulk of the species that we get at Toronto Wildlife Centre. So I am going to share my screen. I do have some slides and some videos to show you to get a better idea of what we do as a wildlife rehabilitation center. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? We're good? Okay. So today we're going to focus on birds and cities and reducing threats in order to save bird lives. So to begin with, I do have a short video that's an overview of the work that Toronto Wildlife Centre does.
We all love living near nature, and the Greater Toronto Area is a spectacular place to do that. With its forests, ravines, rivers, and lakes. There are almost 6.5 million people who call the GTA home, but we're not alone. There are also millions of wild animals who live in our communities, encouraged to do so by the natural areas we maintain and protect. But wild animals haven't evolved with glass and hydro lines and roads, so for them life can be a struggle. They can get into dangerous and difficult situations as they just try to live their lives. When wild animals are in trouble, they need expert help, and they need it fast. Toronto Wildlife Centre opened in 1993 with the goal of helping people and wildlife to peacefully coexist. Our team of experienced, dedicated, and knowledgeable staff work with community volunteers every day to save wild lives. Toronto Wildlife Centre has become an integral part of life in the GTA for both wild animals and the people who want to help them. No one knows when or where a wildlife emergency will happen, but they know that Toronto Wildlife Centre will be there to help. And with your continued support, we'll be here for a long time, helping to save animals and turn challenging situations into happy endings.
Okay, so you get a little bit of a picture of all the different animals that we work with at Toronto Wildlife Centre. So just to go over a few facts, Cheryl did cover some of these already. So we have been open every single day since 1993, 7 days a week, even holidays. This year marked our busiest year to date, and we admitted over 6,500 wild animals for care. And we actually are up to over 300 different species. Through our wildlife hotline, we handle approximately 40,000 calls from members of the public every single year, everything from, how do I keep rabbits from eating the vegetables in my garden to I found this hawk that has a broken wing to, there's a mangy coyote in my neighborhood. So just about everything. And then through our wildlife rescue program, we also rescue 1,000 animals or so per year that are in dangerous or difficult situations that the members of the public can't handle. So we have a dedicated team. It's the only program in Ontario to have this, where our team will go out, and if there's a deer that has fallen deep down in a pit, they can get it, or there's a loon frozen in the middle of a lake, or there's a bird caught in kite string way up 60 feet high in a tree. Our trained team can go out and rescue those animals. And then through our education program, we reach approximately or up to 5,000 people per year, so children, youth, and adults alike, and many more through our social media platforms and newsletters as well. And we are a charity, so we do run entirely on donations. A lot of people think that we're associated with the city, but we're not. We are an independent charity, and we are the only hospital for wildlife in Toronto, and in fact, most of the greater Toronto area. The next closest wildlife rehabilitator is up in Pefferlaw, which is about an hour and a half north. So we do serve a very large population of people and wildlife. So I'm just going to stop sharing for one quick second because I want to know, and I can't see the chat if I don't think. We'll see if I can. What do you think are the biggest threats facing songbirds? So we're going to start off with talking about songbirds. I just wonder if you can write in the chat what you think are the biggest things, the biggest issues harming songbirds. I'll just give you
Vicky,
15,
I do have one question
Yeah.
from one of our participants. Do you get any support from Canadian Wildlife Association or any other organization?
So I'm assuming they maybe mean CWF, Canadian Wildlife Federation. No. So, I mean, I think we may have in the past in terms of a grant, but not in terms of, ongoing operations. Lots of different organizations, granting foundations, individuals support us, some on a larger scale. But it's not, there's only a few that are that regular ongoing operational support. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I can see the chat. I don't have to stop sharing my screen. That's great. So just to look through this, so I'm seeing windows. Yeah, that's a big one we'll talk about. Cats, absolutely. We're going to talk about that today as well. Climate change. I don't have it in my songbird section, but I have it in my waterbird section for so sure. We will be talking about that. Light at night, windows in tall buildings, pesticides. We're going to touch on that as well. So loss of habitat. Great. So I'm glad that many of you are actually quite aware of some of the biggest issues that our songbirds are facing. So let's dive into that a little bit more about the types of things that we see at Toronto Wildlife Centre and some of the issues. So there was a report that came out in 2019 that found that 2.9 billion birds have disappeared from just North America since 1970, almost 3 million birds. So this is a huge decline in our songbird population. And it's really an issue that we need to start addressing so that that trend doesn't continue. So in forests alone, forest dwelling birds have lost approximately 1 billion birds. Grassland birds, they're hard hit as well, 50% reduction in their population. So, you know, a lot of people associate songbirds with forests, but a lot of them nest in these long, tall, grassy fields, which, you know, are often primed for development. Aerial insectivores are also down quite a bit, 32%. Coastal shorebirds. So what we're seeing is really just across species of songbirds, they're going down. So even our common species, like red-winged blackbirds, for example, even though we still consider them common, their populations are still in decline. So this is a really big issue. So we know that habitat loss, habitat degradation, you know, cutting up patches of land so they're not connected anymore. These are really big problems for songbirds, and habitat loss is certainly the biggest cause of songbird loss. But next to that, human-caused reasons are, first of all, cats, huge. We can see across, this is a North America statistic, so that's including the USA and Canada, 2.6 billion approximately each year. Windows are the next big one on that list. And of course we have, as you go down, there's lots of other issues as well, but we can see from this graph that that's quite shocking how many birds are killed just from cats in windows alone. And we do see the effects of that at Toronto Wildlife Centre. We see those patients coming in due to those reasons. So to start off with, we'll start with cats and wildlife. So in Canada, the research estimates that humans, we people, aside from habitat loss, so this doesn't include habitat loss, we're responsible for 130 to 433 million birds each year, death of that many birds per year. 75% of that number is due to cats, so feral and pet cats roaming freely outdoors. So these numbers are really hard to gauge. That's why you see that huge fluctuation of 130 to 43 million birds. But we know that cats are a major cause of birds being killed and injured. On our hotline, our wildlife hotline, we receive hundreds, maybe thousands of calls each year related to birds attacked by cats. So I do have a little video here. It's a bit of a sad video. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a downer on in the beginning of the presentation, but I do think that it hits home. These are actual calls that have come into our hotline from people who have found birds that have been attacked by cats. Now, the cats may be their own pet cat that they let roam freely, or it could be feral cats, their neighbor's cat. So just to give an example of what we hear on our hotline day after day after day. So I'll play that video now.
My cat has brought me, I think it's a finch. I don't know if he's gonna make it. I just found a injured bird in our backyard, thinking I probably got attacked by the neighborhood cats. And I think its secondary flight feathers have been ripped out, so the little guy or girl can't fly. Hi, my name is Ariel Lando, and there's a dying bird in my backyard that my cat tried to kill. I'm calling because I have a bird that was being pawed at by some cats. It seems to be a little bit hurt.
A sparrow, a bird that I got away from a cat that was mauling it, but it's obviously wounded because it can't move.
I have an injured bird, yep, and my cat was plucking the feathers from him.
I think it's a robin in my backyard. Its wing looks broken. I think one of the stray cats got to it. I have a bird. It looks like my cat may have got a hold of it, but I'm not sure if its neck's broken, but it's still alive.
A cat has caught a bird. The bird is injured. It's in my home. It's still breathing. I don't know whether it will survive.
So I like to play that video because one thing we hear a lot when we're talking about cats outdoors is, you know, my cat doesn't kill, which we'll talk about in a moment, or, you know, it's only one bird. It doesn't happen very often. But when you really think of the cumulative effect of cats on birds, then we really see where the issue is. And we're sort of in that privileged position at Toronto Wildlife Centre to hear over and over and over again the actual effect that cats are having on birds. And, you know, that's 10 or 12 calls. You can multiply that by, you know, hundreds throughout spring, especially spring and summer season, although it does happen year round. So just to give you an idea of just the magnitude of the problem. So when we do admit birds that have been attacked by a cat, the common injuries include their tail feathers being ripped out because a cat will attack from behind and kind of grab a hold of their tail and the bird's trying to get away, so it'll rip out, open wounds, subcutaneous emphysema. So birds have air sacs on the outside of their bodies. And if they're punctured, they fill up with air and it makes it really difficult for them to breathe. They can also get infected and it's a life-threatening situation. Also fractured bones, head trauma. The big thing is, you know, we hear people say, oh, it got away, it flew away, I hope it would be okay. A cat attack is an absolute emergency for a bird. It needs medical attention right away. If it doesn't, the chances of it surviving are very low. A big thing is they need antibiotics because as a lot of us know already, cats have a lot of bacteria in their mouth. So even as a human, big, large human like us, if we get a cat bite, we usually go on antibiotics. And, you know, if you imagine a small little bird, how quickly bacteria could pass throughout its entire body, then it could kill the bird quite quickly. So we do need to see those birds as soon as possible. This little scarlet tanager in this photo was attacked by a cat and it was suffering from ulcers in its eyes, several cuts and puncture wounds around its body, but it did get to us quickly, which is the best thing that we can ask for. A really important point to know as well, and this is why we talk about prevention so much, because even if that bird does get into Toronto Wildlife Centre and receives medical attention, most birds attacked by cats will not survive. Even with our best treatment, with our veterinarians on top of it, it is an extremely serious medical issue. So bringing them in after an attack is good for sure, but prevention is what we need to see more of so that they don't end up with us in the first place. Another thing we tend to hear, because this can be a bit of a controversial issue, is, you know, you guys hate cats. You know, you only care about the birds, don't care about the cats. Well, that's not true. Many of us are have cat companions at home, and we love our cats dearly. And one thing to remember as well is that cats, when they're let left to roam freely, they can also get into some serious trouble. So, for example, they could be the victim of a car strike. They can get into fights with other cats and other wildlife. They can be preyed upon by other wildlife, like a coyote or a raccoon, or even a great horned owl will take a cat. They can get into poisonous substances. There's a lot of horrible people out there will do cruel things, or, you know, somebody can find them and make them their own pet. I had an indoor cat that escaped for a few days, and I put posters up all over the neighborhood, and one person ended up calling us, had found him, and he'd been living in their house for 4 days, and they were going to adopt him. But then they saw her poster. So, you know, keeping our cats safe is really important too. So what do we do to encourage safety for cats and birds? Well, one thing you can do if you want to give them some outside time is you can create some sort of catio, a cat patio. So this is a pretty fancy one. It doesn't have to be to that level as the one in this photo, but something to keep them enclosed, to keep birds out and to keep cats in. You can even buy tents, certain tents that would do the trick in this case. Also, walking them on a leash, training them when they're young usually is a little bit better than when they're already old and might not take to it so easily. But, you know, just like we walk dogs on a leash and we don't let them roam freely, we need to start taking the same approach with our pet cats. Now, sometimes we do hear people say, I have a scrunchie on my cat, I have a bell on my cat. That might help a little bit. You know, if a bell's ringing, then an adult bird might have time to fly away, or the scrunchies make them more visible that they can see the cat coming. But it doesn't help all the time, first of all, even with adult cats or with adult birds, I'm sorry. But in springtime, we have fledglings on the ground, and summer as well. So fledglings are sort of teenager birds that leave the nest. They spend some time on the ground before they can fly. And their parents are still taking care of them, and they're building up their flight muscles. They're learning the rules of living, you know, in cities and in the environment. So they actually can't get away from a cat, whether it's wearing a scrunchie or a bell or whatever, because they can't fly. The other thing we hear sometimes is my cat doesn't kill. And there was actually a study done, I believe it was the University of Georgia, but I could be getting that wrong. I could send that information along if anyone's interested. And they did a kitty camera project where they put a camera attached to some cats that were regular outdoor cats. And they found that they only brought home 1 out of every 4 of their kills. And then some cats didn't ever bring it home. So we really don't know what they're up to when they are out roaming freely. And they did find that they were into a lot of other types of mischief as well. So just, you know, recognizing if they're out of your sight, you don't really know what they're up to. So our goal really is to transition away from having free roaming cats outdoors. And you may be saying, oh my goodness, like my cat yowls at the back door, there's no way I can. So, you know, this is a process. So if the cat you have right now, it seems impossible, you know, with the next cat you get, you know, take a new approach. There's also a really good website called catsandbirds.ca. And there's lots of information on there about the issue, as well as, you know, ways you can keep your cat entertained indoors, how to transition them indoors. So I do recommend having a look at that website if you're a cat owner. So the next issue we see, which you all had mentioned already, is windows. So with windows, they're a problem in the day and they're a problem at night. So in the daytime, they're either transparent or they're reflective, and birds either try to fly through them and collide with the glass, or they try to fly to what is reflected in them. So like in that big building, we see that tree reflected. So the bird is actually trying to fly toward that tree, doesn't realize there's a hard surface there, and boom, they hit like this little brown creeper in this photo here. And then at night, artificial lights from cities actually draw birds in. And once they're in our downtown core, it's kind of like a maze. It's really confusing for them. All the lights, they can't quite figure how to get out. So they often die from exhaustion from flying around so much, or they collide with windows, which are also reflective, or they're drawn towards the light. So both of these are really big issues. So this is a video of some of the migratory birds that we've had come into our center, and you can see them getting some treatment. There is some vocals in this with one of our wildlife rehabilitators speaking about what's happening with the birds. It's just a little bit on the low side, so you may need to turn your volume up a little bit.
Oh, Number 2. I know. All males so far. And this is just isophyll. It helps with the ulcers. I'm also going to give him a pain med because ulcers are definitely painful. Little one, lateral to his pupil. Buddy. Poor little guy. Amazing.
So we admit 1,000 or more birds every year that have been hit by, or that have hit a window or have been suspected of hitting a window. And again, this is a medical emergency. They do need to be seen right away, which we'll talk about shortly. So often we get asked, how do I get them to you, right? So if you ever find a bird that's hit a window, you really want to put it in a smooth-sided container. If it's a small bird, a smaller container is better. So ideally, a paper bag is great. And you can see this is a box full of birds that have been found in the downtown streets of Toronto, brought in by FLAP volunteers, which we'll talk about in a moment. And they put them in these paper bags. It keeps their feathers safe. It keeps them safe from doing any damage to their bodies. A small cardboard box is also a good way to get them contained. Not letting them fly away right away. Again, it's a medical emergency, so we do need to see them as soon as possible. So some typical injuries associated with window strikes. We see this little wood thrush has been anesthetized. It has to have an X-ray to check for fractures, and they did find a broken clavicle or collarbone. We see this yellow-bellied sapsucker had some eye ulcers, some bleeding behind the eyes. And the little ovenbird is getting some pain medication for head trauma. So if you found these birds, and unless they couldn't fly, you really wouldn't know from these injuries that are internal that there's something wrong, right? Some of them can still fly away, but it doesn't mean that they're going to survive. We actually know that a lot of birds that hit windows, they fly away and then they just die somewhere else. So if you can immediately contain a bird that's hit a window and get it to a wildlife rehabilitator, that is the best option to give it a chance. So addressing the issue. So let's start with transparent glass. So I have to say, these railings are one of my biggest pet peeves because they're becoming so prevalent and birds cannot tell that they're there. So, they're either like a large piece of glass. These are in panes, but sometimes they're just like a full, you guys have seen these glass railings, right? So these are often transparent more so than reflective, although they can still be reflective, and birds will try to fly through them, right? Often there's a plant on the patio that has these glass railings, or like a small tree or whatever, and the birds will see those trees and plants and try to fly through that glass to them, and then they will hit. Another problem with transparent windows is especially where they make a V. So where two walls come together on a house, and especially with more modern architecture, we see a lot of rooms that are just pure glass, right, that come together in a V. So birds can see right through that, and they want to go through from one side to the other side. So they will collide. Plants on the inside of a window really close can also be a problem. Again, the bird is seeing those plants on the other side. They want to try and fly through that window. to them. So putting your plants further back, a little further back away from the window is one way you can help there. Now, of course, reflective glass is a problem as well. So we can see in these two home windows just how dangerous these ones actually are. The one on the left is reflecting an entire area of trees and shrubs. Same with on the right, we've got a big tree reflected in that window. So these, I would say, would be a high risk of birds colliding with these windows. So again, bringing a bird to a wildlife rehabilitator after it's hit a window is fantastic. It's going to continue happening. We have to be there and we have to treat these birds, but preventative solutions are really the key. So if you're interested, there is a website called flap.org. That stands for Fatal Light Awareness Program. And they have lots of information on there about the issue, as well as techniques you can use to make your windows safer for birds. So on the left, these are feather-friendly applications. So it's a piece of tape basically that has dots on it, and you apply it to the outside of your window. And that tells the bird, all those dots tells the bird there's something solid there. We do see a lot of the times that people put like a bird decal on the window, like one or two. That's not good enough because there's too much empty space around them. So the bird can still see that reflection. They'll be like, yep, loads of space up on that top left side. I'm going to fly through there. Boom, they hit the window. So any kind of application shouldn't be more than 2 inches apart. You can use those decals. You just have to put more of them on the window. In emergencies, or until you have time to properly fix your windows, a bar of soap will do the trick. Always on the outside of the window, right? Because if it's on the inside, that reflection is still on the outside. So you just want to draw lots of lines. You can make squiggly lines, draw a picture, do whatever you want. But that will be enough for the birds to see that there's a solid surface there. And when you're ready to make a more permanent change, then you can just wash the soap off. But these are only 2 options. There's a lot of options on the website at Flap. So I do recommend giving that a look. So lastly, we talked a little bit about habitat loss. So I do want to address that a little bit because we have to remember that they're losing habitat largely because of development, right? So where our homes are currently, there used to be forests, used to be grasslands. So if we can help rebuild at least a little bit of that, and the more of us that do that, then the more connected all these forests and grasslands become again. So one problem we have is lawns, right? So these big expansive lawns that have nothing in them, we only want grass in them, right? Like the weeds are, we want to get them removed, right? So it's actually a monoculture. There's really not supporting any kind of life in these lawns. Now, some people start panicking. They're like, you're telling me to get rid of my entire lawn? No, absolutely not. I just really want you to start thinking about, is there a portion of that lawn that I can give back to birds, right? So because these lawns have replaced good habitat and good food sources for birds, and they're really more focused on an aesthetic, right? Like, look at my beautiful lawn, rather than any kind of functionality and supporting wildlife. So if you do want to help, really focus on planting native species. So these types of plants, they've evolved along our native wildlife, and they provide the food and the habitat that they need to survive. So planting fruit and seed bearing plants that will give wild animals a natural food source are great. So we can see a picture of a serviceberry. I have one in my yard, and the birds love the serviceberry tree, as well as lots of beneficial insects as well. Leaving up your stalks and any kind of seed pods for the winter. A lot of times we clean up our garden, we cut everything down. What we're doing is we're cutting down shelter, and we're cutting down food sources that birds can rely on in the winter. So leave those standing. They also, insects are also hibernating in those plant stalks, and not all birds eat seeds and fruit, right? Some of them are insectivores. So we want to keep those good insects in there so that there's a food source for these birds come spring. Selecting a wide variety of plants, including grasses, is really great. And even things like leaving decaying trees standing, if it's safe to do so, or not removing the entire tree, because that, again, it can be a really good source for insect as well as shelter. Little woodpeckers love to go after those dying trees. Another question we get asked a lot is, should I put up a bird feeder? So one thing we always want people to know, well, there's a couple of things. So there are some issues that we'll talk about that arise with bird feeders. We're not saying you absolutely can't feed birds, but you do need to be aware of the issues. And the other thing I really like to point out is putting up a bird feeder does not replace the need for good habitat, right? If you have a big empty lawn with no good plants, native plants in it for shelter, a bird feeder can even be more dangerous because the birds have nowhere to flee to if a predator approaches. So bird feeders don't replace the need for good habitat. So some of the issues that can arise with bird feeders is that it is a feeding ground. So that means that birds are going to congregate in a way that they normally wouldn't in the wild. So disease can spread easily among them. One thing we do see is a conjunctivitis. So just like pink eye for people, and it can make their eye all goopy and scabby, and it can be life-threatening because it can completely cover their eye if it gets really, really bad. So spread of disease is definitely a concern at bird feeders. Be aware that predation may increase at your bird feeder. So that Cooper's hawk that lives in your neighborhood is going to like your bird feeder because it's a buffet of birds for that hawk. So one of the complaints we get through our wildlife hotline is, well, how do I keep my bird feeder out, but I don't want the hawk to come and eat all my birds? Well, that's just how nature works, right? The hawk is going to take advantage of an easy meal. So that is a possibility as well. And most importantly, again, we hear this complaint a lot. If you try to feed one species or a group of species like birds, you're feeding every animal out there. So, little mice might come along and take advantage of all the seeds that have fallen out of the bird feeder. But then that fox or that coyote who wants to eat the little mouse might be attracted by that as well. So if you find you're having issues that you're getting animals coming around that you might not be comfortable with, then it's time to take down the bird feeder, right? There's no way to exclude species. It's very difficult to do that. I know there's a lot of bird feeders out there that are like squirrel proof or this or that, but it really, at the end of the day, you can't exclude all species except for little songbirds. So if you do have a bird feeder, some things to keep in mind to keep birds safe. It should be taken down weekly, especially in the summertime. If you do put it out in the summer, which really birds do have abundant food supply in the summer, they don't really need it, but take it down, wash it out with hot soapy water and let it dry completely before filling it up with fresh seed. Try to clean up the seed that has fallen to the ground to minimize any rodents coming around and cleaning up the stuff on the bottom. Avoid using human food. I mean, it's not good for birds anyway. It's not a natural food source for them. And things that are greasy, like peanut butter, can get on their feathers, and that affects their waterproofing. So that can actually turn into a life-threatening situation as well. So if it's, the dead of winter like this, and it's like suet or something that would be greasy, it's frozen, it's not that big of an issue. But if it's warmer out, then it does become a bit of an issue. And in terms of windows, this isn't always intuitive, but you should actually put your bird feeder closer to your window. So within 1/2 meter, not further out than that. The closer to the window, the better, because if the birds suddenly take off flying, say there is that Cooper's hawk that comes near, they don't have enough room to build up speed to collide hard with a window, right? They've only got like a couple feet. They're not going to hit the window hard. So the closer to the window, the better, and it gives you a better view of those little guys chomping on their food anyhow. And like I already said, feeders don't replace the need for habitat. Shelter, which plants and trees and shrubs provide, is equally important to the food. And not all birds are fruit and seed eaters, right? We have our swallows that are insectivores. So we want to encourage habitat that will provide lots of good insects for them. So moving on to birds of prey, does anybody have any thoughts about what are the biggest threats to birds of prey?
sector.
You can just chat it if you have any ideas. When I do just see a question here regarding the feeding of birds, if it's helpful to their survival to feed them. So there isn't a lot of research, frankly, done on the benefits of feeding. So far, we know that we don't think it causes a problem to them in terms of nutrition, as long as they're fed good bird seed. But yeah, it's really hard to research that on a broad scale. Most Audubon societies say it's okay to feed, but one thing I just really want to reiterate is all those things we just talked about. Because in terms of survival, we have to consider those other things as well. If you're noticing that most of the birds at your bird feeder are being taken by a Cooper's hawk, it's probably not helping too much, right? So yeah. Okay, so maybe chat's not working. Did anybody put in for the birds of prey? I'm not seeing any. Maybe nobody has any idea about birds of prey here. What the biggest threats are. Rodenticides, there we go. Ashley's chimed in, perfect. Yeah, so rodenticides are definitely an issue. And we'll talk about a couple of other issues as well. So one thing we see a lot with birds of prey are vehicle strikes. So they tend to hunt near roads, and that puts them in the path of moving vehicles. So common injuries can include fractured bones, head trauma, and they can be in our care for weeks or even months. So one thing to remember, if you are in an area that you know that there are birds of prey around, just slowing down. If you know that they're known to frequent an area, because they really can come out of nowhere. They're just going to swoop down across the road right in front of the car, and then we have a collision. Another point that is good to remember is not to toss food out of your car window. Sometimes people go, oh, it's just an apple core, it's going to rot away. It's totally fine. But what that does is, again, that attracts other animals to the roadside, like rodents, and then that'll be an attractant for the bird of prey to swoop after those rodents. Again, it's a medical emergency if they've been hit by a car. So calling Toronto Wildlife Centre if you find an injured bird of prey, and we can walk you through next steps. A lot of the time we will ask you to contain the bird and get it into our center, but some situations are more difficult than others. So we can walk you through that. So this next video is it's a red-tailed hawk that was in our care, and this is one of our veterinarians giving it an exam.
No, not according to his treatment sheet. There's a tablet in his tray.
Maybe add it.
Yeah. And then people can understand.
So when they come in, they need a lot of different types of medications, anti-inflammatories, pain meds, antibiotics. It can take a lot of care, just like humans in a hospital. If you were hit by a car, I mean, wild animals still need that same level of attention in order to heal and to return to the wild. So again, we see window strikes. Again, this is another cause of injury for birds of prey, just like songbirds. And the same mitigation techniques can be used to make windows safe for birds of prey, just like songbirds. We know that high-rise buildings downtown, especially clusters of them, are a particular concern to birds of prey. For example, peregrine falcons, like the one pictured in this photo, they nest on downtown towers. So historically, they were cliff dwellers. They've adapted to urban areas by nesting on high-rise buildings. And when the young are ready to fledge, they'll take their first flight, but they're in this big urban center and they're at a very high risk of colliding with a window when they take their first few flights. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but the Canadian Peregrine Foundation actually monitors these birds because they were at risk for quite a long time. And they actually have nest cams on their cameras, so you can watch their little families grow, and it's really interesting to watch. But they also have volunteers that monitor these birds taking their first flights, and they'll watch where they go, and if they need to go back up to the nest, they'll take them. They monitor to see if they collide with windows. So again, balcony windows we do see as being a problem. So many of our towers are now this year collided and got stuck actually in a balcony window and had to be admitted to Toronto Wildlife Center. And you can see him healing in the picture on the right. But again, these glass windows on these towers are a pretty big issue. They can also become trapped. Birds of prey have a tendency of becoming trapped in buildings and structures. So the picture on the right, again, just to continue with the glass, we can see those high rises, all glass balconies, really confusing for a bird that's in there. Now this guy didn't get stuck in the balcony part of it, but they do get stuck in there quite a bit. So the glass is there and they can't figure out how to get past that glass and get out again. And they can do a lot of damage that way. They can get caught in nets like pigeon netting. You know, we see that sometimes where it's not installed correctly or it's been left to disrepair and they can get caught in there. And another big one we see with birds of prey is them getting trapped in warehouses or large structures like this guy on the left. And those ones are really difficult. Our rescue team has to go out for those ones and to contain them. So, or if we try to get them out on their own, but it can be really challenging. So those are some issues we see happening with birds of prey. This next video is about a little merlin that was actually trapped in a warehouse. So yeah, what you saw there was a process called imping. So we sometimes have to do some pretty cool and unusual techniques to get these animals back out into the wild again. And unfortunately, not every patient we take in survives, but we can help other patients with their feathers sometimes. So we would collect the important primary feathers off of a deceased bird of prey from the same species. And then they carefully, as you saw in the video, insert those feathers into the broken feather shafts of the current patient. And that just really speeds up the process of their healing because we don't have to wait for them to grow in those new feathers again. You know, other situations, you may have seen this little owl in the yogurt container on our Facebook feed recently, but we had him all wrapped up in there because it was difficult to hold this guy and to keep him safe in order to feed him, keep him upright in order for our team to be able to feed him. You know, feeding birds of prey, we have to put the food, the big pieces of meat right down into their crop. A lot of them don't eat in captivity, so we have to hand feed each of them. So every patient that comes in, we really have to consider what is their injury, what is their species, what are their natural behaviors, and make a treatment plan according to what's going on with that individual. Just like if you as a human went into the hospital, you'd have your very own treatment plan, so do each of our animals. So someone also did mention rodenticide. So poison, again, is a big problem for birds of prey. There was a recent study just put out that found that there were detectable levels of anticoagulant rodenticides and 33 tested raptors. So that's a really high number. So I know nobody wants rodents around their home, but just remember that they are a critical food supply for many species of predators, including birds of prey. So if there is an issue, really addressing why the rodents are there in the first place. If, is there piles of garbage around? Is there construction materials all piled up that they can take shelter? And that's always the first approach. And our hotline can always point you in direction if you need help as well. And there's information on our website about how to humanely deal with mice and rats that might be becoming a problem. We also don't recommend using glue traps. A lot of wild patients are admitted on actually attached to glue traps, and they're not the target species. We had a lot of birds actually come in that are attached to glue traps, so that's not a good option as well. All right, lastly, moving on to water birds. Does anybody have any ideas about what some threats are facing water birds? You can chat if you have any idea. Some of the things that we might see at Toronto Wildlife Centre that affects water birds. Plastic bags. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Fishing line and hooks. Dogs. Yeah, I won't get to talk about that today, but that is definitely an issue. I could be on here all day talking about all the different issues, but I unfortunately have to pick the top one. Boats. Yes, boat weeks are a huge problem for nesting water birds. Toxic runoffs. So yeah, these are all really good points. Unfortunately, I won't have a chance to talk about all of those issues today. But I think every one of those answers is absolutely correct. So fishing line and hooks. So that's one that we will definitely talk about, because we do also like to focus on what we can do as individuals. So a lot of the things that I've talked about today are things that you could literally take today and start applying to your lives, right, to help wildlife. So this next video, this is a poor Canada goose that had fishing line all wrapped around his little legs, and we had to rescue this guy. So I'll play this video next. So we see a lot of water birds coming in affected by fishing line, fishing hooks, and lead sinkers. And this is across species. So Canada geese, mergansers, grebes, herons, just dozens and dozens of them admitted every year because of this. And not just fishing line and hooks, like any kind of garbage in the lake is potentially dangerous for them, but any kind of string type product like fishing line is especially dangerous because it just gets wrapped all around them, onto their wings, their limbs, even their beaks, and hooks can get embedded into their flesh. Lead sinkers that have been used for fishing really affect bottom feeders like swans, and they can ingest them and they can actually get be poisoned. It's toxic for them. And then we see swans that are just completely lethargic, they can't walk, and they do have to be brought in for treatment as well. So if you do fish, one thing to remember is to never cut a line while you're fishing. Always bring all of your gear back with you. If you're out on a boat, if you're out at the lake, if you see any garbage in the water, if you see any line, please pick it up. You really could be saving the life of a bird by doing that simple act. Cleaning up our waterways is incredibly important. And areas around Toronto where people fish, I know in the Rouge, there's areas where there's just fishing line hanging from poles and lines all around. So if you live in one of those areas, contacting your local counselor and pushing for cleanup of those areas can really help save a lot of birds. So some additional threats we've talked about a little bit, and again, I can't address everything today, unfortunately, but we're seeing some effects of heat and climate change on birds, and I'll show you a video on some ring-billed gulls in a moment that kind of shows some of the problems. We've also been seeing outbreaks in the last few years. So botulism, we had a lot of ducks admitted with botulism this past summer, which is a bacteria in the water, and it really affects their neurological system, become weak, lethargic, and if they're not treated, they die. And we did save quite a few of these birds, but getting them quickly was really, really important. A few years ago, we had an outbreak of what we think was Newcastle's disease in cormorants. And I don't know if you've ever encountered a cormorant, but they're pretty feisty guys. It's hard to get close to them. And they were just dropping out of the sky. They were just walking around people's neighborhoods. It was very unusual and sad, and we couldn't help them. So these types of outbreaks seem to be becoming more prevalent as well. So we don't know exactly what's going on there, but it's possible that it is related to changes in the water. So the next video, this has happened a few years now, where nesting gull colonies, which nest on the top of like grocery stores or big warehouses, they get too hot. We've had these really, really hot days in the summers, and the little babies, they can't take the heat on these rooftops, and so they jump, and then they're essentially orphaned because we can't get them back together with their parents. So this next video is about how we handled over 400 baby gulls a few summers ago.
Baby gulls are dying at this industrial building in Scarborough, and it's because of scorching temperatures on the roof. The Toronto Wildlife Centre is rescuing as many as they can. So far, Toronto Wildlife Centre has rescued more than 300 of these baby gulls, and with scorching temperatures not going away anytime soon, they're not sure how much longer they'll be taking them in. But despite the scramble, at least here the birds are safe and definitely a little cooler. Volunteers are spraying them with water every few hours, feeding them lake smelt and keeping them in the shade.
So just as we close up here, I'll just go over just a few more things that you might need to know. If you find a sick or injured bird, you can visit our website, and there's species-specific information there on how to contain different types of birds. Please don't ever give any kind of sick animal or injured animal any food or water. We need to assess them first before we start introducing any of that. Just putting them in a dark, quiet place and not offering any kind of treatment until you have spoken with us at the center. Again, keeping them in a smooth-sided enclosure. So if it's a bigger bird, something like a pet carrier with the grill in the front covered with a blanket is good. For small birds, just a small paper bag or a box is great. Some birds, like herons, do have very pointy beaks, and they will poke your eyes out if you're not careful. So if you are attempting to contain a bird like that, read through our website first, wear protective eyewear. In some cases, we do need to send out our rescue team in those situations. And like other ones too, like the hawks in the warehouse, we often have to send out our wildlife rescue team. So if you ever have any questions, you can always call our wildlife hotline as well, and we can help you, guide you through that process. So if you're interested in the work that we do, we are always looking for volunteers. We love volunteers. We rely on up to 400 of them every year. There's lots of different opportunities, from administration to wildlife rescue to animal care to helping out in our hotline to driving. So many options, and you can find the area that suits you best. And most importantly, like, we really can't do the work that we do without the help of our our volunteers. They're critical to our operations, and we just love each and every one of them. So if you want to join our team, that is a really great way to do so. If you're interested in supporting the care of these animals, donating either a monetary gift or an in-kind gift is wonderful. We really can't do this without our supporters as well. So it's really through the funding that we get through our donations that we're able to give animals a second chance in the wild once again. And if you want to learn more, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, they're really great ways to see some of our patients in care. We often tell little stories about them. There's lots of videos on there. So you can see more what we do if you follow any of our social media platforms. And if you're interested in listening to me talk again, we will be doing 2 more sessions. So the next one will be Remarkable Residents, where I talk about a lot of the myths and misconceptions surrounding certain species, like coyotes, for example, bats, skunks, those kind of more maligned species we'll be talking about. And that's in February. And then in April, we'll be doing wild babies. This is always a fun one because we get to see all these cute little guys, and you can learn the best ways to help wild babies in our city. So that is all I have for you guys today. But if you have questions, I am more than happy to answer them for you.
Just a minute. Hi, I just want to thank you, Victoria. Thank you for all your effort that you put
You're
in
welcome.
providing us with the information and about the plight of birds and giving us steps and strategies that we can use to make a difference. It was really hard to see those birds that were injured. The songbirds particularly touched me. Anyway,
Yeah.
I know Victoria has promised that she'll answer each and every question, so let's open it up. I guess, how do you want them in the chat?
Yeah, either the chat, I think. Oh, so there's already a question in here. Where are we located? Excellent question. So we're located in Downsview Park at Keel and Shepherd in Toronto. So that's our main center where you would bring an animal. We will be moving to the east end of Toronto at some point. We're building a new center out there, but it's been a slow process. So for right now, Downsview Park at Keel and Shepherd, but we do recommend that you always give us a call first, because we may be able to guide you through the situation without the animal coming in. In some cases, they don't need to come to our center. So yeah, that's where we're located. Any other questions? Oh, somebody come up in the chat here. Oh, you're welcome. Just said thank you for a presentation. So yeah, you're welcome. Happy to be here. Great. Well, I don't see any questions. So last chance. No. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I hope to see all of you again in our next sessions, and spread the word to the rest of your organization members and get them to come out as well. Always happy to talk about wildlife with everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.